The mention of childhood brings to our minds endless days filled with joy and laughter, friends and family, carelessness and love. But when a child is left to fend for herself on the streets of our largest cities, childhood can be brutal. Childhood is a magic moment in which the real and the imaginary are inseparable companions, a world full of discoveries, games, and happiness, in which the child develops, surrounded by the love and protection of the family. This automatic image that plays out like a movie in the minds of most people is very far from the reality of a steadily increasing number of children. For these children, fantasy is replaced by hunger, games by petty crime, and drug addiction, family affection by sexual abuse, and they learn very early in life to doubt the existence of happiness. They are children and young people from 0 to 20 years old who are on the streets by imposition of the social and economic conditions of modern societies. Many of them have been thrown into the street by their own parents or are forced to bet for money to help support the family. Others have fled from domestic violence and from parents addicted to alcohol and drugs. A large number are victims of rape and sexual abuse.
Eu tô na rua porque minha mãe e meu pai me bate.
Tá aqui porque minha mãe me xinga pra caramba, eu não gosto dela não.
A vida na rua é verdadeiro inferno.
Today, the larger cities harbor virtual hordes of young people who live on the margins of society, sleeping in the streets, living off scraps of discarded food and petty theft, in direct confrontation with public order, and learning all of the tricks necessary for survival in a hostile environment. These conditions, combined with violently accelerated emotional maturity, stress, and ignorance, make street children especially vulnerable to infection by AIDS. Many of these young people are addicted to drugs, from the inhaled types to the injectable. A study made of street children in Mexico City showed that 12% of them had sniffed glue regularly from the age of 9. Illegal use of injectable drugs, although still not frequent, has shown signs of a rapid increase. Street children do not attend school. Some give up studying in the first few years, and others have never set foot in a classroom. Without sufficient qualification to work in traditional jobs, the alternatives for survival are very limited for these youngsters. They find themselves obliged to provide for their own support by begging, eating food salvaged from garbage cans, stealing, drug trafficking, and prostitution. It is extremely difficult to determine with any precision just how many street children there are, and it is even more difficult to ascertain the extent of HIV infection among these young people. Estimates based on studies suggest a total of 100 million children living in the streets around the world. A large portion of that population is found in Latin America. Brazil alone has between 25 and 30 million of these young people. That number represents a quarter of the total world population of street children concentrated in one Latin American country alone. Isolated studies indicate that the number of children infected by the AIDS virus in this population is growing at an alarming rate. Sexual activity among street children begins before puberty and is practiced with the same frequency observed in young adults. In most cases, sex is introduced very early in the form of rape or sexual abuse by an adult in the child's own family. Studies show that sexual advances by older relatives do not occur only once, but are repeated over a long period of time. In the streets, sexual abuse is no less common. Leaders of bands of street children, mostly adolescent boys, exercise their power through physical violence. Sex becomes routine, used as a reward and as a punishment. Sexual activities are also used as a form of survival. Many children offer sexual services not only for money or something else that contributes to their upkeep, but also in the hope of having a roof over their heads for the night.
Don José se acuesta con la Yesenia. La Chilo, que la Rosa, o las otras que lleguen ahí. Cuando lo hace de seña, tenemos que coger para el cuarto y hacerlo con él.
In spite of all the sexual violence suffered by these children, sex is also seen as a way of transmitting love and caring. This type of sexual activity is practiced between friends with the consent of both parties in order to fill their need for affection. Such exchanges of affection do not always represent an exclusive relationship with one companion, but rather a form of sexual comfort. The incidence of sexually transmitted diseases among street children is high and can be used as evidence of sexual activity without protection. These young people seldom use condoms, thereby exposing themselves to a high risk of contamination by AIDS. Knowledge about AIDS varies among street children.
El SIDA que se puede transmitir por hacer el amor con una prostituta sin usar condón y por la sangre.
Es un virus que no tiene cura, pero no podemos rechazar tampoco a esas personas.
Ah, pega tu transando com esses caras que tu não sabe, sai transando assim por aí.
AIDS pega porque não é transfusão de sangue, pico. É que toma pico, se enturma assim, é porque você pode pegar AIDS.
Sí me han hablado, ¿no?, del SIDA, que dicen que le lleva la chingada a uno porque se muere, ¿no? Se muere cuando ya lo tiene vencido, ¿no? Dicen que que le agarran temblores hacia uno, dicen dolores de cabeza, gripas, así, muchas cosas, ¿no? Pero, o sea, cuando he estado haciendo el amor, así ni me he acordado
¿Tú no piensas en eso?
O sea, no he pensado en SIDA ni nada.
Dr. Carlos Cáceres, a researcher at Cayetano Heredia University in Lima, suggests the adoption of more efficient measures of preventive education.
Se usa, de hecho, condones con mayor frecuencia, pero tampoco se les usa siempre, ¿no? Entonces, esto es algo.
Yes, they do use condoms, but not always. So this is something that indicates that some programs need to be developed to combat this fact by giving these young boys and girls a better idea, a more exact idea of the many types of risks that do exist, so that this way they can take precautions.
Informing and educating these young people is a task of primary importance in today's society. To achieve it requires that a climate of communication and trust be established between the children and the educator. In the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, the Casa Aberta Jabaquara organization works with street children to orient them in such areas such as health, employment, school, the prevention of sexually transmitted diseases, and the consequences of the indiscriminate use of drugs. Casa Jabaquara makes an effort to develop this work based on proximity and the trust established with the children.
E o trabalho dela é com crianças e adolescentes em situação de rua, que envolve crianças que
We work with children and adolescents who spend their time in the streets, hanging out, begging, or selling something. Our work is to approach them, establish a bond of trust, and get them to return to their family or to school, go into treatment for a health problem, or find a place to live. Each case is specific.
In Brasilia, the country's capital, a project called Street Consultation is underway. The project focuses on developing educational action directly in the streets, with special attention given to the physical and mental health of the children and their reintegration into the family and society.
Era Daniela, uma moça jovem de pouquíssima idade, isso abalou a sociedade, todo mundo chorou sua despedida. O crime na barraca, só advogado viu, anotou a placa para poder ficar por perto e depois de uma bela gravação encontraram uma moça estirada no chão, tão bonita.
The aim of this work is to create a service in the street for consultation for the families and the street children.
Another alternative for minors in Brasilia is the school in the park for boys and girls. The school is open to all street children and functions like a normal primary school. The children arrive early, take a bath, and go to the classroom where they learn, among other things, about the prevention of sexually transmitted diseases.
We take care of 120 street children monthly. 60 of them come to school every day. The work we do in relation to drugs and sexual diseases is done in a classroom, where the teacher is always ready to discuss and talk with the students about all these things, which are ever present in their lives.
The Caracol organization in Mexico City provides help for street children through job training and information about the prevention of drug abuse and AIDS. The Caracol institution works directly in the street with prevention of sexually transmittable diseases through the Prevencida Callejero project. The function of the educator should be to transmit information that is pertinent to the reality of the young people who live in the streets. The attempt to impose moralistic values brings distrust and rejection by the children. In Lima, Peru, the organization known as CEDROS maintains a home for street children. There, the children receive job training and information about AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases. The home functions as a residence, restaurant, and workshop. All of the products made by the children are sold, and the money goes into improving the institution.
In the rehabilitation and re-education of these minors, the idea is to have them decide to break away from the situation they find themselves in, living in the streets, using drugs, involved in criminal activities, and for they themselves to decide to make a change, take a step forward in their lives.
In El Salvador, young prostitutes are educated about the dangers of HIV, AIDS, and other sexually transmitted diseases. They also receive education and support to eventually leave the streets, find work, and succeed on their own. One of the challenges for educators is to see that the children recognize they are being treated with respect and that the provision of food, clothing, and shelter do not represent handouts, but rather attitudes generated by human solidarity. The Grupo Renacer in the city of Bogotá, Colombia, is developing activities designed to improve the situation of street children and offer them alternatives for their reintegration into society.
The children who come to the foundation are generally infected with at least one type of sexually transmitted disease. There is a lack of knowledge about such diseases, a great lack of knowledge about AIDS.
In spite of the many efforts by non-governmental organizations and institutions sponsored by the governments of various nations, the work of educating and improving the conditions faced by street children is still just beginning. Contamination of these young people by sexually transmitted diseases is increasing, and new solutions must be studied and put into practice quickly. The distribution of condoms must be increased together with informative pamphlets written in effective language easily understood by street children. Special attention should be given to illiteracy, which is frequent among these young people, making the use of messages transmitted by videotape and stage plays necessary. No effort to resolve the problem of street children will be successful unless society as a whole is exposed to the problems faced by street children. The involvement and support of the community for programs aimed at helping these young people are extremely important if there is to be any real improvement in the conditions of the lives of these children.